Today morning, today's daf yomi is Kesubos 89, Kesubos 90. Today's daf yomi is Kesubos Tzadi. So we're going to start on the bottom of 89b, around 6 lines from the bottom. So at the Mishnah, Shnei Gitin Ushtei Kesubos. Let's say there are 2 Gitin and 2 Kesubos. So a woman produces a get, an ksuba that predates the get, and then a second get, and a ksuba that predates that get. So then, if you have shtei gitin and shtei ksubas, kova shtei ksubas are 2 separate transactions, and she can collect each ksuba because she has each ksuba corresponds to a get. But shtei ksubos for get echad, or if she has 2 ksubos but 1 get, meaning to say she has 2 ksubos but only 1 get associated with it. O ksuva v'shnei gitin, or 1 ksuva, meaning to say in the first case she has 2 ksuvos and 1 get. Both ksuvos predated the get, so clearly the get came after the second ksuva. O ksuva v'shnei gitin, or 1 ksuva and 2 gets. O ksuva v'get unisa, or a ksuva with get and death. Eina govel ksuva sa'achas. Then she only collects 1 ksuva. Because we assume Shamagarish Ishto V'chsira, if somebody marries his wife and then divorces her and then remarries her, and he doesn't give her another ksuva, we're going to say Amanas ksuva rishona machzira. He remarried her on the basis of the first ksuva, meaning to say that was his assumption. So the Gemara says Ibai b'hai gavya, Ibai b'hai gavya. If he wants, he could collect with either one of. If he wants, he could collect with either one of the ksuvos. Is that really the case? Because it says shnei gitin and shnei ksuvos go shnei ksuvos, but in the next case it says shnei ksuvos for get echad. He has 2 ksuvos and 1 get. He could collect with either one of the ksuvos. So why is that the case? Oh, hold on. I want to make sure I open the door. Hold on 1 second. Okay, so sorry about that. So Shnei, so maybe this is a reputation of Rav Nachman or Shmuel, because what did Rav Nachman say in the name of Shmuel? Shnei shtaros hayotzim b'zeh achar zeh. If you have 2 contracts that are referring to the same matter, and one is issued after the other one, bitel sheni esarishon, the second one nullifies the first one. So we see from here that this is a refutation of Rav Nachman's statement in the name of Shmuel, because our Mishnah is saying that that you can choose whichever one you want to use. The wife could choose whichever one he wants. Rav Nachman said the name of Shmuel, then no, the second one nullifies the first one. Where it says no, Rav Nachman the Yosef Diko Tosefes Kasvei. No, Rav Nachman would admit that if the second one added something, the second contract added, let's say, a palm tree, it was obviously adding on to the first contract and not nullifying it. And so then you have the option whether or not you want to use the second contract, which is more property, or the first contract, which has an earlier lien. That's also the circumstance here. The second contract, the second ksuba adds on property. Let's say she produces the get and ksuva, and also he died in get kodem ksuva. If the divorce was prior to the ksuva, then govesh takes ksuvos. Then it's obviously the case that he wrote her a second ksuva when he remarried her, and she collects 1 ksuva corresponding to the get, and then she collects a second ksuva corresponding to the ksuva. And if ksuva kodemas leget, but if let's say the ksuva came before the get, then eino govel ksuva achas, then she only collects 1 ksuva, because we say shamagarish ishto v'chsira, that a person divorces a woman and remarries her. I'm going to ask ksuva rishon. He just remarried her with the intent to just keep them connected by that one ksuva. Says the Mishnah, Katan Sheisiu Aviv. Let's say there's a minor whose father married him off. It has no legal standing. He did it. He thought it was good, but it wasn't good. Ksuva kayemes. Then we say that their ksuva is going to be valid after the minor becomes an adult. Because we say shalmanaske and kima. Because we say on this basis the husband shalmanaske and kima. Because on the basis of this ksuva, they were living together, we assume that the ksuva was valid for that reason. It means say that they followed through on this ksuva. So if the katan, his father marries her off, we're going to say the ksuva is valid, because we were going to say that they kept living together, and even though as a minor the ksuva wasn't valid, after the fact the ksuva was valid. Gerish and Iskaira Ishto Imo, let's say there was a convert a husband and a wife, before they were married, they converted. They got married and then they converted. Then we're going to say ksubasa kayames. We're going to say that the ksuba is going to be binding after they get married. They had a ksuba before they get married. Then they converted. We're going to say the ksuba is binding. Shalmanas kain kaima, because on the basis of this marriage, on this ksuba, they kept living together, and so we saw that was the implicit assumption of their relationship. So Amar Rav, we're in the middle of Tzadi Amar Aleph. Amar Rav Huna lo shanu amano masayim. When do we say that if a minor who got married before they became an adult, they continue to live together? And when do we assume that under those circumstances that the ksuba transfers, and we're going to say it's binding after their marriage? Where the ksuba was the basic ksuba, mana masayim. And Tosfos asked the question, wasn't that the case for everyone? So Tosfos comes up with an answer for that, but that's something we have to deal with. But if the ksuba had extra additional parts to it, then she doesn't get to claim that if she was married to a minor and then he became of age. Rabbi Yehuda says no, she even gets to claim the extra. So may say the Gemara knows to challenge Rabbi Yehuda, because it says in the Brisa chidshu, but tell us not chidshu. If they developed something, if they added something new to the ksuva, Rashi says chidshu katav mishehigdil, when the minor became an adult, or a convert after converted, if they added something onto the first ksuva, they added something onto it, chidshu, she can take what was added on, which implies that only if it was chidshu, only if they added something on, can she take it. Lo chidshu lo. But if they didn't add anything on, then she can't take any of the tosefes. So we see from here, there's a question on Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Rav, who says that she could take the extra parts of the ksuba. Gemara says no. No, we could read it. No, she could also take what she added on. Gemara says no. You can't say that that's the way to read it. Because we say in the Brisa chidshu no tells much chidshu. That if they add on something, she could take that. But if they didn't add anything on, that the virgin collects 200 and the widow 100. We see from here that they don't get the Tosefes. To the Rabbi Yehuda, this is a refutation of Rabbi Yehuda. So how did Rabbi Yehuda make this mistake? The Mishnah, he read the Mishnah incorrectly, because Savar, he read Ksuva Kayemes when it says that if the minor was a minor when they get married and then he became an adult, her Ksuva is Kayemes. Her Ksuva passes through. Akua Milsaka, he thought that referred to everything, even to the Tosefes. Velohi, Aikra Ksuva, it only refers to the main part of the Ksuva. Anyway, I said that Tosfos asked the question, but everybody is a Tanai Bezin, that every marriage the woman gets a 100 or 200. So what is this referring to? So Tosfos is saying, Tosfos' answer to this question is, no, that she's no longer a virgin. So you might have thought she doesn't get the virgin ksuva of 200 if she got married as a minor. So say, no, it carries on to the state she was when she got married. That's Tosfos' answer to that question. Anyway, Hadran alacha kosef ishto, and now we start the 10th chapter of Mesachas Kesubos, Mishahaya. So Mishahaya Naso Shtei Nashim, somebody was married to two women, Umeis, and then he died. Umeis Harishona, Mishahaya Naso Shtei Nashim. It's a little tricky. So somebody was married to two women, Umeis, and then he dies. Harishona Kodemes Lashnia. Then the first wife, she got married first, so everything was mortgaged to her. So therefore, she comes before the first one to inherit to collect her ksuba. She comes prior to the second woman and her heirs. And the heirs of the first one, they come prior to the heirs of the second one. Again, because everything was mortgaged to the first woman. But now what happened was Nasa Sarishona, let's say he married the first one, Umesa, she dies. So he really gets her ksuba. Nasa Shnia, and then the second one he marries, Umes, and then he dies, Umesu. So then he dies. So now he has to pay her ksuva. So Shnia v'Yersheha, the second one and her heirs. Who are her heirs? What are we talking about here? Shnia v'Yersheha Kodmin. So the second one and her heirs come prior to the Yersha Rishona. The second one and her heirs, because now she's a creditor, she's collecting her ksuba, whereas the first one is collecting an inheritance. What's the inheritance of the first one that they're collecting? So the Rishonim, they're coming to collect their father. This is what we called before as the ksuba spanin dichrin, the male ksuba. Now, when the woman gets married and the father of the girl doesn't want all the money to transfer to the second marriage, so he carves out the relationship that after he dies, this amount of money, that if their mother predeceases the father, this amount of money will go to his daughter's children, and not to the second children. This is called a ksuvas benin dechrin. But the creditor comes prior. The creditor, which is the woman who married who's the second ksuba, she comes prior to the heirs of the first wife. So the Gemara says, from the fact that it says that the first woman, she gets her ksuba prior to the second woman, and it doesn't say that the first one gets a ksuba, the second one doesn't get anything. You see from here that if the second one came along and seized the assets before the first one, we don't take it away from her, because they use the language of comes prior. So if the second one came first and seized it, she would get it. So we see from here that if there's two creditors, one's first in line and one's second in line, if the second in line comes and seizes the assets before the first in line, it's considered a valid seizure. So we say Mashagava Gava La'olam. Mara says, not necessarily. Maybe I could say to you, actually, the second one has not seized anything. Michael Demis, what does it mean when it says that the first one comes prior? It means it doesn't mean that they just come first. It means that the second one doesn't get the ksuva at all. That's all it means. That the second one doesn't get the ksuva at all. So like we stated, Ben Kodem Labas, like we say in the son comes prior to a daughter when it comes to inherit. Doesn't mean that the daughter could seize anything. The daughter gets nothing in that circumstance. So it means Lagamri. Ikada or alternatively, we have the opposite version. For the fact, we have the opposite version. For the fact that it doesn't say if the second one grabbed it, the second one comes first and grabs it, we don't take it out of her hands. We see that, in fact, if she does come and grab it, we do take it away from her. We see from here that if a later creditor comes and seizes it, that which they seized is not considered collected. So the Gemara says not necessarily. No, maybe we could say that the later creditor has seized it. And I did Tanishni of Yersha because the second half of the mission says the second one and her heirs come prior to the first one. Therefore, we use that language also in the first clause. So the Gemara has two opposite approaches, but basically they're both saying it's inconclusive. So now we have a confusing Gemara, at least for me, but for you it would probably be much easier. So Nasa as Arishona, it said that if he marries the first woman and then he dies, and then she dies, and then he marries a second woman, and then he dies, that the second one and her heirs get her assets before the first one and her heirs, because the second one we said was a creditor, first one was considered an heir. So the Gemara says we're going to learn out from this Shema Mina plus. We're going to learn from this three things. Shema Mina achas ba'achas achas b'moso. Yeshan Kesubos Banim Dichrin. We're going to learn from here that Achas B'chayav, Achas B'mosa, that if one inherited while he was alive, meaning to say Achas B'chayav, that if she died while he was alive, and the other one, if the other one was died after he was dead, so both of them died, but one died while he was alive. That's the first wife, and the other one died after he died. Then we're going to say Yeshan Kesubos Banim Dichrin. And under those circumstances, the first one is still going to get the Kesubos Banim Dichrin, which we've been talking about. That the Kesubos Banim Dichrin is that the first one still inherits. And we're not going to be concerned about a fight here. What will be the fight about? Well, the first one is inheriting, and the second one is getting the ksuba as a credit, as a creditor. And we're not concerned that the second one is going to say to the first one, listen, you're getting the full ksuba spanim dichrin as an inheritance. That's not fair, because I should also be partaking in that inheritance, because I'm coming to claim mine just as a creditor. And so that's nothing to do with inheritance. So you're actually in the end taking more. We don't say that. We say that the first one, Kesubos Banim Dichrin, still collects it. How do we learn that? From the fact that it states, from the fact that it says the second one and her heirs come prior to the first one. It means they mikdam hu dekadmi, but it means to say that they come prior to the first one. But if there was assets for the first one to take as an inheritance, they're able to take it. That's the first thing we learn. The second thing we learn is Ushma Mina. The second thing we learn is Ksuba Nasis Motar L'Chaverta. So we learn from here that the concept of the Ksuba Banim Dichrin Hold on 1 second. It's on speakerphone. And you have to take the whole conversation, it's going to be recorded. Okay, so we say, Shema Mina, we also learn the second one is Ksuba Nasis Motar L'Chaverta. That there's a basic principle that the concept of Kesubos Banim Dichrin, which is basically that the male sons of the first wife, they inherit what their mother brought into the ksuba. That's considered a tosef, as an addition to the law of inheritance from the Torah, but it can't uproot it. So there has to be, in order for Kesubos Banim Dichrin to work, there has to be an extra part of the estate that's left over for an inheritance. And so in this case, we're saying that if the extra part is the ksuba, that's going to be considered a motar l'chaverta. That's going to be considered, this extra part, this extra ksuba is going to be considered enough to be a surplus. So that's considered. How do we know that that's enough to say that the Kesubos Banim Dichrin is able to kick in? From the fact that our Mishnah doesn't add in this clause, if there is an extra moser dinar, they say, they collect the Kesubos Banim Dichrin, even if the first ksuba, even if there's nothing left in the estate. Well, how could that be? Well, because the first ksuba is considered the moser dinar. And what's the third thing we learn? Shema Mina, Kesubos Banim Dichrin. We learn that the male ksuba motar from mishavdei. That we don't collect that male ksuba from property that has a lien on it, because if we would collect it from property that has a lien on it, then if you would collect it from property that was a lien on it, and then the descendants of the first woman who died prior to the husband dying, they could just go and say, we could seize our assets from the estate that you mortgaged to the second wife, because we could seize it from lien property. From the fact we don't say that, we see you can't seize the Kesubos Banim Dichrin from property that has a lien on it. So Maske for Rashi challenges this. How do you know that this is the case? Maybe you could say to you. So Rav Ashi first challenges the first ruling. He says, how do we know that this case is accurate? Maybe I could say to you, achas b'chayev, achas b'moso, elang ksuvas banan different. That if one of the women died before the husband died and the other one died after the husband died, that we don't do a ksuvas banan different, and because the first one's inheriting it as a creditor, and the second one's inheritance. It's not fair that only one gets the inheritance of the ksuvas banan different. So the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, my kodmin, and we would say when it says that the first one comes first, what does it mean? L'nacha katami, meaning to say that before they divide up the inheritance equally, not as ksuvas banan different, we give out the heirs of the second one. They collect their ksuba first. That's all it refers to. So if that's the case, why does it even need to mention the heirs of the first one? It shouldn't even mention it if they're not getting any ksuvas banan different. Mara says, no, the reason I mention is since we say the second one and their heirs, they collect the ksuba, and then we say the first one. But really, everybody's just inheriting it as an inheritance and not as the ksuba banan different. And then the second law that you said we could derive from here, and that you say that the ksuba acts as the surplus. Maybe that's not the case either. Maybe the ksuba is not considered a surplus. In this case, there actually was a surplus. And that's why we're saying in this case the heirs get it, but not that the ksuba is the surplus. So the Gemara says, well, this idea of achas b'chayav, achas b'moso tanahi, this idea if one woman died before the husband, the other one died after the husband, whether or not we say that the heirs of the first one get to inherit as a ksuvas banan different, that's actually a machokas amongst the Tanaim. The Tanya meisu achas b'chayav achas b'moso. So we learned in the Brisa, if one of the women died, one while he was alive and the other one after he dies, Benanas Omer, that the Benanas taught, the offspring of the first woman who died while their father was still alive, they're allowed to say to the offspring of the second one, whose father died before the second one's mother, they're saying that you are the offspring of a creditor, and therefore take your ksuva and get out of the inheritance, and we're going to get the rest as ksuvas banan different. So therefore, that's consistent with what we want to say we infer from our Mishnah. Whereas Rabbi Kiva says, no, from the moment that the husband died while the second wife is still alive, then the ksuvas banan different jumped away, and now it all fell into a big lump. And so therefore, since the second one gets it as a creditor, then the first one no longer gets the ksuvas banan different, and they all have to split it equally. So the Gemara says, isn't this the dispute? That Bananas is saying that in this circumstance there is a ksuvas banan different. And the other one says, no, once in their lifetime, once in their death, there is no. Rabbi Akiva is saying there's no ksuvas banan different. So the Gemara says, no, it's possible that we could say that Rabbi Akiva and Bananas are not having that dispute, but there's another way to explain it. So Rabba says, we found the Rabban Bey Rav that they were sitting there and they were saying, everybody says like Bananas, and like our first understanding of our Mishnah, and everybody says in this case of achas b'chayav, achas b'moso, there is mel ksuba, v'hacha b'ksuba nasa moso l'chaverta. Here, what is Bananas and Rabbi Kiva arguing about? Whether or not the ksuba can be considered the surplus, v'hu adin, and they're also arguing about whether in general a creditor is considered a surplus. Marasavar Bananas is saying ksuba nasis moso l'chaverta, the ksuba is considered the surplus, and so to a creditor. And so therefore, in this case, we do apply the principle of ksuba banan different. And the same, and Rabbi Kiva disagrees. And I say, says Rabbah, that my creditor, everybody says that that's not a surplus. Kipuigi by ksuba. They're only arguing about ksuba. By creditor, it makes sense to say it's not a surplus because that's something that's a credit to somebody who's not at all connected to the marriage. But a ksuba, he was connected to the marriage, so maybe it's considered a surplus in the estate. So Maskefar Rav Yossi challenges this. So why does Rabbi Akiva say that the moment that husband dies, when the second one's still alive, he says that the inheritance jumped away? He should say im yosher, im yesh moser dinar mibale. It's only jumped away if there's no moser. If there's a moser dinar, if there's no moser dinar, it hasn't jumped away. Meaning to say, if there's a moser dinar, then they get the ksubas banin dichrin. But if not, they don't. Elam Rav Yosef achas ba'achas b'chayav achas b'moso k'miflagi. He said, no, that's what we're arguing about. Mahani Tanai ki Hani Tanai. And Benanas Rabbi Akiva have the same dispute as Rabbi Shimon and the Tanakama of the following brisa. The Tanya, we learned Nasas Harishona Umesa, Nasas Hashnia Umes. So we learned if the first one, he marries the first one and she dies, Nasas Hashnia Umes. And then he marries the second one and he dies first. The second children come after death, and they take the ksuva. Rabbi Shimon says, Moser dinar, elu notling ksuvas iman, ve'elu notling ksuvas iman. If there's moser dinar, then each one can take the ksuva. Ve'im lav, cholkim mishav. If there isn't a moser dinar, and they split it equally. Isn't this argument about the marasav achas b'chayav achas b'moso yeshlang ksuvas banin different? That in this case of achas b'chayav achas b'moso there is the ksuvas banin different. That will be the position of Rabbi Shimon. So the Gemara says, no. Everybody says that you have, in this case of achas b'chayav achas b'moso, you have ksuvas banin different. If the surplus dinar is from real estate, does it count as a surplus dinar? Well, one says from the real estate, yes. From the movables, no. One say you can count the mar savar, it can count as a surplus even if it's from movables. All right, we'll stop here, pick this up. We'll review it later today, and also